Okay, we're at Thursday now, and we're still inside the MVP phase of our development. And as it is in the middle of November, as close to the middle of November as we can actually get, since we have Tuesday, Thursday classes, it's really critical and important that all the pods are working towards getting to a MVP deployment by sometime next week. And so with that stated, we had our pod assignments last Tuesday. I want to do a check-in to see where we're all at with the current assignments. Because at this point, it's all about accountability, right? We want to be accountable for the tasks that we've grabbed, and we want to ensure that we're moving forward in a rapid rate. So this isn't at the part of the semester now where we can kind of just slowly progress towards a build. Now it's all about producing results. So I want to check in again, just like we did last class with the pods, and then I'll let you start to coordinate and work together. But I want to see if there's any obstacles that are hit or either hit, or whether there were any successes made in just the last 2 days. I know that's not a lot of turnaround, but it's enough to actually start doing some preliminary work on where we need to go. You'll have a lot more time, obviously, between Thursday and Tuesday to get where you need to be, but it's a good time for us to all check in together, not just with me on a per pod basis, but for all the pods to know what all the other pods are doing at this time. So with that said, let's move, and here I'll jump over here in case you were unaware. I had posted each one of these information sessions we're having, each one of these kinds of stand-ups that we're doing, where we're updating, I'm putting onto the Capstone playlist. So this will be the 4th video. We already have the 4th video of the Capstone playlist. The first was the requirements analysis. The second was an overview of our actual dev cycles until we get to our deployment and our post-mortem stage. And the third one was our MVP discussion. That's when we were when I was remote. And the 4th one was the one we did just on Tuesday, where we did the pod assignments. So with that said, I put the pod assignments inside of the description of the video. So if you need a quick reminder of what your assignment is, it's posted right there. And with that said, let's go through and start stepping through. So pod 1, if this
we had the request form. I have a working prototype ready to go.
Actually, let me do this so that I can capture it earlier. Each time I have you come up, I'd want a representative of the pod to come and actually speak in front of the class. That way you can pick it up on my laptop microphone. So as we go ahead and provide this for archival reasons so that you can go back on reflection, it'll be picked up here as well.
So on pod 1, we have a working prototype ready to go. We need to get with pod 4 and pod 9. Pod 4 for the database, pod 9 for the authentication. Because as it is right now, just anybody can go to our forum, submit a request. And I have a local server hosted just for testing purposes. So I noticed the drawbacks with that current setup. We can easily get spammed. I also wanted to talk to Dr. Ted. You told us to do it on GitHub Pages, but for GitHub Pages, all your code has to be public for it to work.
Yes.
So as far as like hosting things with IP addresses and all, probably isn't a great idea.
Well, so it depends on how the form works, and that's one thing we can have discussions about. So if the public-facing side of the form is just like a static web page that has fields and a submit button, and that submit button clicks to some URL that links to a server that's waiting for that submission form, then that's fine to have on GitHub Pages. And then your backend server is the thing that you'd have to host privately off of the GitHub repo. Okay. But if you're going with another form factor, completely fine. Just means we won't use GitHub Pages as a mechanism. Right. And so that's one thing that we can kind of discuss. And I think when we were talking about this just earlier, I had mentioned just having as a test case hosting the client side and the server side, so you can see how the resulting data was being provided back, so that when it came time to integrating your code with the rest of the code base, you could have meaningful feedback on
All right.
it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, where do you want us to, right now, I just have it on my personal GitHub. Would you like us host a page on the classes repo?
Yeah, so what we'll do is, and I don't know if this has happened yet, we had talked about creating a repo for the server and a repo for the client side code. So let's go ahead and create another repo for the client code, and you can just, well, yeah, you can post it there. It depends on where it goes. You can post it on either the server side or client side.
I have a little bit of both.
Because you could potentially do it all server side too. You hit a link and then it's on the server renders the form and then sends that information back.
All right.
So it can go in either direction. But right now, yeah, if you're doing it on your own repo, that's fine. But I would prefer to start migrating it to the shared repo so everyone has visibility of the code you're working on.
All right.
And that way you have visibility for when you're displaying, when you go to show this off in a kind of interview process and say, this was a project I was involved in, your code would be part of that project along with your commit history.
All right. Anybody have any questions?
So does everyone understand what pod 1 is working on in terms of the final build?
I can show it off if needed.
That might not be a bad idea, but after maybe probably can't show it off on my computer, but it's not a bad idea to be able to kind of check in. And actually, what we might do, since we have these instances, is instead of showing it off to the entire class, pods that have that are stakeholders in what they're working on, you can probably set up on a local computer or laptop so that you can kind of show off to pods who need to know what you're working on. Because maybe not all pods are stakeholders, and might be better for them to coordinate with other pods in some instances. So it'll give it'll give the pods a chance to know what they need to look at. Excellent. Okay, so it sounds like we've had good progress made. It sounds like we've had some good progress made in terms of the submission form. By submission form, this was the recommendation that we're able to have external users who are non-authenticated users request for an image to be published onto our kiosk, right? That was the intent. And so, as we stated earlier, that's not necessarily the MVP build, but we know immediately once we get our MVP build deployed, that's going to be one of the first high-level features we want in there. And we have enough pods that we can start delegating high-level features in anticipation of integrating them into our MVP build. Excellent. So it sounds like we have good progress there. Pod 2, do you want to come up and just speak about either the successes you've had or the obstacles you've had up to this point?
Hello, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm representing pod 2. We're doing the MVP documentation. We're going to be working with pod 8, our scrum team. They have some notes and everything. So we're just going to finalize that documentation today based off of the information we gathered from today too, from the rest of the pods.
And the goal of what you're doing then is we stated earlier the importance that your documentation should be living just like your code base. That should be as up to date as your code base. So the goal here is you're going to provide the documentation as it's currently being developed of the code with MVP. So anyone who has questions knows what the state of the code base is and who is working on what.
Okay, so we'll publish that today and then continue to keep that up to date for you guys.
Excellent. Does anyone have any questions about that? Where would the documentation be published at?
We can add it to the GitHub repo.
Okay, perfect. Okay. At which point, like, is there gonna be some kind of requirement for you to interface with all the pods for like what you would need documentation from them, or is it more of like a high level documentation?
I would just say, so I know our Scrum team is doing a good job of it right now, kind of like keeping up with you guys and your updates as well. So kind of just like bouncing off whoever's like Scrum Master and like those updated tasks and what we're
like that.
Yeah, but the main priority of it will be the MVP build and like what's next though, right? Like we really want to prioritize like stating clearly what the MVP
It's
is and like
super
next steps
critical
for development.
that we get an MVP build, in my opinion, done
Fine.
by next week, because the week after next is gonna be the Thanksgiving break. So we need to have, and then once we get past Thanksgiving break, then we roll right into the first week of December.
Yep.
And so we wanna at least try to get the MVP deployed so that we can add some of the mission critical features that go on top of that.
Can I add a comment? I don't know how like extraneous this might be, so I'm sorry you guys if you're mad at me for saying this. But so kind of like what we're doing now is like a daily stand-up, daily scrum stand-up kind of thing. So I was just thinking if your pod has worked on something, like just drop it in your pod chat, like any updates instead of like the scrum or whoever having to like constantly ask for it. Like just as you make updates or improvements, make note of that in Discord.
This is a really good suggestion. Every pod has a public channel, and the point, the goal, the motivation of giving all the pods public channels is to be able to share information external to the pod. So clearly, most of the pods have been using their private channel to discuss and coordinate internally to the pod, but as you actually are working on things and as you're actually publishing things, leave updates in your public channel so that other people can actually see what the state, the visible state that you're actually either working or deploying things at. It's a very good suggestion. And just it creates more transparency between the groups. This is critical if we're going to come together and put together a project.
Yeah, because we only have like 3.5 weeks.
I know. Exciting, right? Excellent. Does anyone have any other questions about documentation? If you do, again, at the end of all this, you can always leave a comment inside the pod channel as well. Like, feel free to start communicating amongst each other. It's very important. It's just as important to have intercommunication between the pods in order to have success with being able to get all of our code bases integrated together. Okay, with that said, pod 3.
Hi, I'm representing pod 3. We don't have anything like tangible yet, but we were kind of just brainstorming last night. We were figuring we probably have to work with like the database team. I don't know if they decided like what database we even or whatever. So we're thinking like live updates for tutoring schedules, and then they would need tutors would need like some way to like actually update their schedule. So I don't know how we do that. Maybe do like a web.
So remind me, so pod 3 is working
Yeah, we're
on,
working on like tutoring schedules.
yeah, tutoring schedules.
Yes. Yeah, recycle too.
And so, and there's a couple ways that you can do this, and for brevity's sake, one way, like, have you thought about the various ways you might have the tutoring schedule? Defined? Like right now, if you think about how the tutoring schedule is illustrated to on the current TVs, it's just it's an image, right? Some image is generated.
Oh yeah, they just have like images set up for the week or whatever.
Exactly. And so clearly, probably in the future, have something more complex. But I mean, you can always like think about how it's currently done and think about ways that it could be improved, but think about what to roll out for this current day release.
That's all I have.
Excellent.
So should pod 3 collaborate with pod? I know you guys are working on the database. Which pod is that for?
Okay, so if pod 3 is working on the tutoring schedule category, just thinking about this, what would be nice to do since you're in the kind of initial planning phase is try to make a plan of what can be done right away, but what a fully featured tutoring schedule would look like. And what I mean by that is in my own mind, to make it easy, we might replicate what we're currently doing inside of the TVs, where we just create we just illustrate the image of the tutoring schedule and create like a tag that says these are the tutoring schedules. And these are like, I don't know if we have like the login information or like the Discord help or other things like that, But in the future, what might be nicer is being able to actually use the system from the server level to key in who the tutors are, and to be able to also actually create the everything internal inside the system, so we do more than just creating the image. And so maybe that's low priority feature, but it gives you an idea of how you could potentially grow what the responsibility of the tutor subsystem is. So that might be a good, while you're working on getting the MVP build, you can think about what a fully fleshed out tutoring subsystem looks like. And then that gives you an idea of how you can start to offer insight to either your pod or other pods who might grab those tasks in the future for where the direction of the tutoring subsystem would go. Okay, pod 4.
All right, we are just in the planning phase right now, and we came up with a couple of observations. First, we wanted to break down what would be needed on the kiosk side. So we agreed that for booking, a user will enter their name and time period and the room and email, but we're not trying to do everybody's job. We're just trying to go through mentally what we'll need for the database. And then tutoring, a user at the kiosk will select a tutor and the time slot and an email that they might have. For appointments with your professor, I don't know if that's on the table, but we couldn't find a definitive list of what we would eventually need. But the user will select a professor and a time slot and enter their email. Requests, with any kind of request, you would probably be posting content. Informational, this would be viewing tuition, department, course offerings. So whatever falls into that category. And the clubs, maybe you would request to join a club and enter your name and email from the kiosk, or you would want to view upcoming activities. So with that in mind, we try to break down, okay, with the non-kiosk interaction, meaning those things that would probably take place on a Raspberry server where the database will be stored. Booking, a user will enter the name and time period and the room in their email. What's needed is we need to store the username, date, start time, and the emails. We will probably need a role for this type of activity. And we would need to store somewhere room availability and also the set of applicable rooms, the hours of operation, the remaining time slots, etc. And tutoring would kind of follow that same path with needing a tutoring role and the hours of operation, not operation, but the hours that they'll be teaching, and as well as the other appointments with the professor. And then with requests, you're going to be posting content. So we will probably need an approver role for the approval of the content posted, and the intended location of the posted content, meaning the category and the location where we're going to store that content. And for informational stuff like viewing tuition or other things, we would need the role for the person in charge of updating that informational material and a link to the image URL if needed. Or else if we're using an external API, we probably wouldn't need that. And for clubs, possibly we would need a role for the club president, and we would need the storage of, if we have a database, to collect the names of the people who want to join that club, and the club president would want to, I don't know if people want to store the activities and events that they would want to post, but by coming up with this list, we could better try to figure out what we need for the database. But we will work with all of you individually. We were just trying to give ourselves an idea of where to start. So I guess we'll get with y'all later.
Yeah, that's a great present, great rundown of everything that that y'all have started to incubate in terms of the requirements of how the data is going to be modeled in the database, and how it's going to be affected by the systems everyone's going to work on. And so if your system is eventually going to have some data persistence, and it's going to have to exist in the database, please reach out to Pod 4 to let them know what the expected requirements of your subsystem is at a data type level, what the data object will actually have to contain. And just like you were discussing with like student organizations, like one of those things might be being able to create new organizations as well. And so some cool things we might have in the future, maybe not right now, but as say for instance, the ECMW is hosting this rubber duck painting event, perhaps they might want to take some images of this event, and then you can make a showcase of images of events that have happened historically. So as people are looking at student organizations, they not only might want to learn about what's happening in the future, but it might behoove them to see what the events look like in the past. And we can kind of do slideshows of the events that had occurred previously to give people an understanding, an idea of why they might want to join us, how fun these events are, to actually see them in person, not just see the advert for them. And these are things that we'll think of. These are kinds of user stories we'll think of as we're constantly developing out and adding more and more features till we get to whatever our final deployed state is. Okay, with that said, Pod 5, you want to discuss a little bit about any advancements you've been making in terms of Leap Motion integration?
Hi, I have no idea where anyone else is, but I'm Pod 5. Right now, usually our work is working behind the scenes. As we've announced in the Discord server before, mass system failure. That was awesome. But I think we have most of the memory cards that we needed secured, as far as I'm aware. I need extra word from Mitch on that, but I think we're able to get the memory cards that we actually needed, better ones that are on Amazon Basics. So they will be able to be stronger, less likely to fail this time. Once we have everything set up, it shouldn't take that long to get everything rebooted, and y'all will actually be able to work on this. As an aside, I discovered earlier today that the Swamp Lab was locked. It's not supposed to be locked. It should never be locked. If you try to go in there and if you find out that it's locked, please get some faculty member to unlock it for you. It should not be locked. I'm gonna go at some point today. I'm gonna go post a note on there urging people to not lock it. It's probably somebody just locked it and it was supposed to be locked. It's whatever. But if it's locked for whatever reason, tell someone that it's locked. It's not supposed to be locked, and hopefully they can unlock for you. As for what we've actually been doing besides doing stuff, fixing up the Raspberry Pis, I've been doing a little bit of research on swiping mechanics. I'm not sure if they have like a built-in function for swiping, but they have plenty of examples for it. So in case we as a group want to do something that doesn't just include pinching, but also like maybe we want to swipe to go back or something like that. I'm doing a bit of research on that. I'm doing a bit of extra stuff on like a little UI mockup I'm making. I'm not the UI person, but obviously we're going to be working hand in hand a lot with actually making the UI work well with the leap hand emotion. So I've been doing a little bit more mockups on that, like making it change color when you're pinching, etc. I'm trying to make it change scale while it's pinching. That's not really working out. I don't know. I'll fix it. Or someone will figure it out. It'll happen. Yeah, that's about it.
One other thing that I saw that Pod 5 is working on, and in case any of you are all interested in, is they had adapted a version of, was it Poem?
Oh yeah. So Dan typed in a Copilot. He had this idea. He was like, "Y'all watch this," and he typed in a Copilot, "Make me a Pong game," and we were like, "What are you doing?" And he made a Pong game. It was fine. It was whatever. And then he managed to hook it up to the camera, and he removed the other, like, or I guess your side, he removed the other paddle and just made it bounce against the wall. So we were literally able to just have this paddle moved by your hand, and it would just like ping pong with the wall, which was neat. So and that was because of Copilot, he did that in like literally like a minute. So like any little extra stuff. Yeah, exactly. Like,
You know, so everyone-
right, exactly. Yeah. Well, it took him 2 minutes and he did his fun. Okay. So, whatever.
Proof of
That's
concept though, to see how.
right,
to,
exactly.
But if you want to see these proof of concepts, you probably coordinate with pod 5 and get a better understanding of how the code, your code can embed with pre-existing code, to see how it can work.
Yeah, if y'all have any ideas on any like specific things that you want to see, I could probably knock something out real quick. Yeah, because this thing could have a lot of possibilities. It's pretty neat. Is that all? I don't think there's anything else. That's it. Any questions or anything?
Yeah, again, if you want to see how the leap motion could potentially work, they're starting to build some sample applications. But the more important thing even is this: because of the limited number of time and all the various tasks, lean into using the power of AI tooling as well. If it can generate sample code as proof of concept in 2 minutes as opposed to like 2 hours, it's going to save you a lot of time so that we can just move on to the next stage. Now, by all means, don't rely blindly on AI code, generated code, right? But it can be a good way of exploring different possibilities and seeing what different outcomes might be. Okay, with that said, pod 6.
Okay, so we're doing the design for the UNO partner dashboard. So far, we don't really have anything like tangible, but we've kind of like brainstormed the design based off like a proof of concept and what our stakeholder kind of wanted. So far what we're thinking is like from the UI, we could select like UNO partners, and then from there, select from a list of UNO partners. So like with us, we interviewed the Air Lab, and we're thinking using their logo as like the background, and then having like 3 little sub modules as like, so some of the things that they said they wanted was, past research, current research, and then like a way to watch videos, like demonstrative videos without having to coordinate with the presenter. So we've kind of got this like proof of concept of like what we want the design to look like. And then we got with pod 7 and they told us they're using tkinter. So we're working on starting to get that implemented. And then I guess just some of the like obstacles that we haven't completely thought through yet is like how we're going to go about like getting the data, like getting PDFs or videos, and then how we're going to store it and update it.
Excellent, I love it. So just a quick number of comments that come to my mind. As you're working specifically with Air Lab, it would be awesome if you can generalize their kind of requirements across almost any kind of research lab.
Yeah, so that was like the plan, is that like those submodules, if a lab were to want exactly the same, they could do the exact same thing. Or if they had different needs, we could tailor the needs for those submodules to like whatever it is that they want to display.
Awesome, yeah, as of now, just assume like it's there, but like we could, like it's the same requirements, but I do like how you're going with the ability to be more extensible. But it would be great to be able to have a page dedicated to Air Lab and Light Lab and then Gulf Sea and like, and they all might have their own posters and might all have their own kind of demo videos. And then all of a sudden, all the research, then you're working on the front end to be able to display all the research coming out of the department. And that's an awesome use case. The other thing that I might recommend doing as well is making, if you haven't already done it, focus on making some mock-ups of what the front end looks like and some of the things that's going to reduce friction. And what I mean by that is it might be important to have like a side button that we uniformly have that always brings you to the main menu. Okay. And that's located somewhere. So since you're working on more like one more complex views, coordinate with the simple UI to the simple who's doing the proof of concept to start talking about the language of UI that's going to be consistent across all the pages. And it might be important to include pod 5 in that as well, to make sure that the kind of granularity of how you're going to implement your buttons is going to be either small enough or big enough or whatever works best for the leap motion's capabilities of precision. So I think the precision for the leap motion might not be as pixel perfect as you might expect the mouse to be. Okay. And so you're going to want to plan for that kind of things. That's awesome though. I love the direction. Does anyone have any questions for that? For pod 5? I'm sorry, pod 6? Okay, so that's beautiful. Let's walk right into pod 7 though, who's going to be working on a very similar like front end portion of the code.
So all I've been doing is just reading up on the UI that I'm going to be using. We're using Tkinter, and we're trying to integrate the users of Leap Motion that's the Pod 5, and we're trying to implement some of their methods, functions into the UI. And that's what I'm doing pretty much. Reading up on their documentation, figuring it out. So, yeah, that's all.
Excellent. Just some quick, similar to what I did to pod 6. Some other things I would just focus on at this stage is making mockups, even before having to use Tkinter to realize what those mockups are going to look like. Get an idea of what like the main page is going to look like. And we said already the MVP build is going to be stupid simple, where like you have like 2 category buttons. You go to one category, the other category, and maybe that home button that brings you back to the main page where you can kind of do your selections. But while you're implementing that, you can start to think of what a more complex front end might look like. It's not your role to do that, but it gives you the idea to start planning forward so that we can generate new tasks in the future. Now, with that said, have you taken advantage of using any kind of AI tooling to try to auto-generate some simple windowing systems and just analyze the code with that and see how the event listeners might set up there? Because if you haven't done that, that's the next thing I would recommend doing. It's important to do your reading as the due diligence, look at all the documentation. But I think it's also one of the nice things about AI generated code now is that it allows you to quickly and rapidly give it some simple specifications, and then you can run it and see how and why it works. And that also gives you insight into how to start building out your applications. Okay. So that's the next kind of recommendation. Just build some simple applications of using AI as kind of co-pilot or as a paired programmer, just to be able to gain that mastery of being able to develop these windowed systems very rapidly. Okay. Okay, let's see here. Pod 8, you want to talk a little bit about what the Scrum team, what the project management side has been looking like for the last 2 days?
Hey guys, so we're the pod that's the Scrum Masters, and we've mostly been just keeping up with everyone and their tasks and writing down like documentations and working with the documentation teams of what everyone's been working on. And we've been looking at the different roadmaps that you guys have uploaded on Git just to see the different features that you guys have wanted to work on, to also start jumpstarting the different types of features we want after the MVP. But yeah. Oh, and for every pod, I was wondering if you guys, as Dr. Ted and Kaylee have mentioned previously, once you guys have like some information about your what you're researching on, can you add the information to your pod channel so that we can also upload it to our documentations as well, so everyone can be on.
A big thing that could go into the feedback you share is obstacles you've encountered as well. So if you're working on code and you realize that it's not running, it's breaking, it's not doing what you want it to do, super critical to start by giving feedback to the rest of the pods for the rest of the dev team that you're running into obstacles, because we might be able to outsource aid to try to conquer those obstacles quicker. So like if you feel like you're delayed or stuck, that's another good thing that's worth sharing, not just the progress you've made, but reasons why you're having problems moving forward. That's as equally, if not more important, to share alongside with your team. Okay, what about pod 9? You want to talk about some of the progress or planning that's gone into the... Okay. Perfect. So now we have a new repo dedicated to the server. And just as a reminder, if you need any insight upon how the API might function to communicate between the server and the client, or how the authentication system might work you're gonna want to reach out to pod 9. So while you start mocking that data, the pods to talk to are going to be 9 and 4. And everyone understands what I mean by mocking data, right? While you're working on your subsystem, you know eventually you're going to integrate with a database, but you can just have a Python list that represents the data that the database would provide you, and that you then parse into Python objects that your subsystem would require.
I just wanted to add real quick also, if any of your systems that you're making, you feel like require or greatly benefit from some kind of specific schedule or functionality in the lead side of things, please come back to me, we can work that out. It might be cool.
About how the I will look like for the login. That will be, you will have the login endpoint, and when you submit the correct credentials, you will get that token. On that token, you can then authenticate to other endpoints with the
Excellent. And maybe in the interim, before the authentication is all fully developed, you might just be able to mock the functionality as if you're an authenticated user, and then we can integrate with the authentication system with your subsystems once all that's ready to be connected together. So don't let, for instance, the authentication model hold you back. Just assume that you're an authenticated user for the purpose of making sure that your functionality works, and then we can implement the actual authentication on top of that. Okay, with that said, let's take a, let's bring in Pod A, who's working on the room booking system, who can kind of give some insight into what the plans for or progress on that might be.
So Pod A is working on the booking system. Our system won't be in the MVP, so ours is lower priority than like database or API. But we have a working prototype right now. I made a Discord bot since we needed a booking system for the software engineering or the swamp lab. But since the pies have been down, I've been kind of putting that on the back burner since we don't really need the booking system right now. That's okay. But it's fully working right now. We need to work with database to figure out which database we're using, but right now we're using SQLite. And I talked to Dr. Wagner about databases, and he said switching from like SQLite to MySQL or any other database should be a seamless process since the syntax is mostly the same. Some other problems we're dealing with is the Discord UI is kind of like bad, so it kind of looks ugly. I try to model it off of like the library booking system. So like the bookings are in 30-minute intervals, and right now you can only really book the swamp lab, but I made it so it's kind of modular and you can add more services to it. So like the tutoring group wants to add like the tutoring stuff to our system, they could seamlessly add it to the schema or the table. That's pretty much it.
One thing that I think might be interesting is if you could kind of generalize the booking system you're working on, think of a way that you can coordinate with potentially in the future the tutoring pod, and not obviously for right now, but with the idea that if we want to create a booking system, a scheduling system for people waiting for a tutor, we can create like a priority queue of sorts, where if you go to see a tutor, you can put yourself into the virtual line, and then you can be alerted or whatnot, or the tutor can kind of cycle through and it can illustrate what the queue looks like to see a tutor. So beyond just having the tutoring schedule, that could be a really good use case of the tutoring subsystem, and the way that you're developing the booking system, see if there can't be a way that it could then be utilized in a way of creating a tutor queue.
Pretty much the way I made it is like the database like logic, you can kind of just detach it from the Discord bot so it could be as modular as possible. And I made just a service table so we can add tutoring and room booking and whatever.
That's awesome. That's
so I can make it as general as possible. I don't really know the specifications.
No, yeah, these are so far for the pods that have been working on the systems that are not part of the MVP build. I've been really impressed at how generalized it can be, besides the kind of very narrow focused goal from the stakeholder that they have. For instance, with research labs, how that can potentially be expanded to cover all the research labs in the department, or like for the booking system, how that could potentially be used for any kind of concept of creating some kind of queue for accessing a resource. And so these resources might be whether you want to book a room or whether you want to book the tutor. And I really like the idea of having being able to connect to the Discord server as well. Not only because then we can display Discord information onto our kiosk, but we could potentially go ahead and try to access information from the kiosk in the Discord. What I mean by that is for like bookings, we could potentially create a bot where you can kind of request, well, what's the availability of this room directly from our Discord server in the future, or what's the current availability of the tutoring? I need help. How busy is the tutor right now? So I do like that, not that this is a priority feature, but I like this idea in the future where you have Discord to kiosk functionality where we can share data in between. And I can definitely see some really strong use cases where that would be nice and valuable.
I pretty much made it like a generalized visualizer for like the timestamps. Well, right now it's just for the swamp lab, but I could just like instead of swamp lab, I would just add.
It could be like Math 320 or whatever for an ACM meeting or somewhere like a workshop or something. And that's the important thing, is thinking about how to modulate, go ahead and have all these stuff on. Very good. I'm glad that you're taking that approach to do that. Okay, let's jump to Pod C at the moment and see what progress Pod C has been making.
So we haven't really talked about it much, but when me and Anthony were here, you said that it was an idea of how to organize our images and basically do some sort of category or by name. But other than that, like
Okay, so things that let's talk about. You want to come up here really quick just so I can go ahead and capture. Okay, so just to make sure everyone understands the role and responsibility Pod C is going to have is going to be able to effectively use images in our system. And so one of the exploratory things that you can do here is you go ahead and look at what modules or packages are already included in Python that makes image management easy. And so what are things, think about things like user interface things that we might want to do with a collection of images. That might be create a slideshow. And so maybe you might need to coordinate with the UI people, whether that's something that's in Tkent or if that's some other module where you can to images in Python code that allows you to be able to toggle. I don't know the best solution, but that's one of the things that you can look into. So what I would do if I were you is talk to the other pods to find out how images and potentially videos, sounds like from stakeholders' perspective, we're not only going to have image support, but video support. See if we can't have some modules that can include both. Let's try to think of all the roles and responsibilities and how we want to use images inside of our system so that we know how we can find tools to work with that. And so that's going to be one of the responsibilities of Pod C. We have a question? I would think actually, well, that's a good question. And so we could have a repository of just like a directory that holds images, and then we might have the database that holds references to where those images are held at. It depends, like when you serialize the image, it might be really big to store the raw image itself into a database. So what might make more sense is you hold a reference where the image is located at, and then we can have those images like hosted privately inside of a directory that we can access. And that might be an easier way of managing images just by on a reference level as opposed to kind of like as a encoded level. But that's just what I'm thinking off the top of my head. So this is one of the things that you can think about and coordinate with the database group and the image group. But if you have any, like as you're developing your systems, a lot of what we're showing is going to be rendered in the form of images. So this is definitely the team you want to coordinate to let them know what some of the responsibilities are so that they can start creating a playground of using images in the way that we might want to utilize them inside of a kiosk. And again, I would communicate in terms of an exploratory nature using AI tools. Get on ChatGPT, say, hey, make a slideshow for me, or show me what kind of image managing packages or modules are available, and do sample code and just start creating proofs of concepts that gives you a kind of a familiarity on how to do that in Python. Does anyone have anyone else have any kind of
Do we know, like, as far as storage, how much storage, like Raspberry Pis that are going to be holding all of the images, videos, whatever?
it's so for in all intents and purposes, you can think of storage as being unbounded. So if we need to get 256, if we need to get a 512 gigabyte SD card, we can do that. If we want to attach a 4 terabyte hard drive to the Raspberry Pi, which then becomes accessible, we can do that. If we want to give network storage to the Raspberry Pi that it has private access to, that comes from our data center, giving it hundreds of terabytes, we can do that. So don't consider storage as a bounded resource. So that means if we want to have hour-long videos for whatever reason, we can make that happen. If we want to have hundreds of thousands of images, we can make that happen. Any other questions? So please, please, please communicate with Pod C though, because Pod C is going to need your insight on how your systems are going to work, so they know how to explore the various image tooling that Python provides for them. And probably one of the things, proofs of concept you could probably do right now, might be to look at how you might be able to make a simple slideshow from a set of images. That would and I would probably then coordinate with your UI team and your advanced UI team to be able to accomplish that, so that everyone's on the same page. Excellent. Thank you so much. Okay, do we have a representative of Yeah, so you could think of it as like a pathway or like a URL or some other kinds of reference points that you can easily modify if you need to. And then we can then create a location where images are then stored at. So that might be the easier way, as opposed to, again, serializing your image and then having that stored directly in your database. Okay, let's see here. Do we have a representative of Pod B? Okay. We'll communicate with Pod B in the future. So we've done a great job so far in just 2 days, the progress we've made. We now know where we're going to go for next Tuesday. What would be ideal is if we can go ahead and potentially move towards actually getting an MVP built and deployed by Tuesday. And as soon as the MVP built is deployed, we'll maybe redefine what our pods are working on. Now, if we can't get there on Tuesday, Tuesday is going to be our that's going to be our ideal point of time that we can get deployed. But if we can't get there, we'll talk about where we're at and what we need to push forward to get the MVP done by Thursday. Excellent. Okay, so is there any other questions that people have? We still have 15 minutes inside of this junction. So what I want you all to do now then, with the remaining 15 minutes, is identify the pods that you have that are stakeholders in what you're working on and talk with them personally. I want to give you 15 minutes to do pod-to-pod interactions in person, so that can kind of remove some of the friction of trying to do it through Discord.
So you gotta talk to Paul more. I mean, at some point,
Yes,
Can you add Mohammed to the GitHub?
yes. Let me do that right now. I'm going to close this.
How interactive you work.